So welcome and thanks for joining Microsoft Power Apps for asset-intensive companies. This event is hosted by Sonata Software, and our speaker today will be Matt Foll. Now, Matt's an entrepreneur and a business technologist that spent the last 18 years working with field service and project-centric organizations around the globe. Today, he comes to us as Sonata's Vice President of Services Sector Solutions. So Matt, welcome.
Great to be here.
So Matt, why don't we kick things off with a little overview of what you're planning to cover today?
Sure, sounds like a plan. Really the purpose of today's meeting is to hopefully educate those in the asset-intensive industries that are maybe struggling with transformation or on their way of transformation and looking at ways to kind of accelerate that path. So we're going to look at the attributes that we see with our asset-intensive customers, really look at a tool like Microsoft Power Platform and how it's helping really take the time to value as it relates to helping us transform our businesses and make that something that's very near term. And then really looking at kind of best practices. How do we actually do it successfully?
Okay, great. Well, listen, you mentioned asset-intensive companies. So can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to be an asset-intensive company?
There's obviously a lot of different definitions. I think if you boil it down, it's really companies that rely heavily on assets to deliver products and service. Is what it really comes down to. And when you look at a couple of other elements and the relevance of what we're going to talk about today, there's tremendous risk as it relates to any disruption in the process and or with what happens to those assets. So it makes for replacing systems and our reliance on systems to be incredibly important. And also when you look at really the optimization or the utilization of those assets and resources becomes a very critical thing. So what you see is, whether you're in utilities, oil and gas, or transportation, or telecommunications, or whatever the industry is, for us, it's really about utilities, oil and gas, capital equipment, and construction. It's really where you see where companies are at today is that they've made huge investments in large systems to manage their assets and their operations. And it's very difficult to really look at replacing those because of the risk and disruption. And we also have a kind of work environment that is both a combination of, in the office, within the field, and many times we rely heavily on our contractors and partners. So it makes for a very difficult process to really look at aligning people, process, and technology and information. So what you're seeing with tools like the Power Platform, or these more model-driven or kind of canvas kind of platforms, is an opportunity for us to really start looking at transforming the business, being able to put some modern tools within the hands of our individual stakeholders in our ecosystem. And they are deep-rooted in kind of digital, which really we'll talk a little bit about, but they're at their core, they're open and connected. So it allows us to kind of plug these tools into an existing ecosystem and to take time as we migrate and upgrade some of these larger systems that we have for asset management or ERP or whatever it may be. And it allows us to do it in a very kind of consumable, low-risk way. So that's really what we're going to talk about today and what is so amazing about these newer technologies.
Well, here is an example, I guess, you provided of a connected enterprise platform architecture specifically for these companies.
Yeah, so I mean, this is what we see as kind of the modern architecture. So, and the view we're looking at here is really what we do in this industry with the Microsoft stack or Microsoft platform. But really, if you look at that red section, that could be any enterprise, whether it be SAP, Oracle, or whatever. And depending on what you're doing for your work management, it could be a litany of different systems. And so what we're seeing here is really about kind of the key kind of elements of really asset-intensive businesses, which is the customer side and, ultimately moving from a very linear way of kind of working with our customers to more of an omni-channel way. And we're providing different services today. In many cases, we're having a different type of customer. If you look at energy and kind of the whole renewable and what's happening with electric market and cars and things like that. And we have a different buyer type of experience expectation. So we need the ability to allow those end customers to work with our business and kind of how they want to work with us, and it be a very seamless process. I mean, if you look at traditional kind of portals and customer kind of engagement in the asset intensive world, many times customers had to go to 3-4 different portals to deal with, one for billing, one for case management or problem resolution and so on. And so how do we streamline that and kind of unify that? If you look at kind of the right side and what I talked about earlier, which is a large percentage of how we operate our assets in our asset intensive businesses is done in the field. And that is kind of multi-thread as it relates to the work that we self-perform versus contractors. And in some cases, that percentage can vary depending on the industry. But we also need an omni-channel type of application for the field side. And that's not just really working with different personas, but it's also in some cases, you may have work processes like permitting that cross multiple personas, internal and external, and even systems and even inputs. So you could have manual inputs for someone that's putting in a manual form for a certain type of permit that needs to be, put into a process that has certain actions and tasks that have to get done. And we need to be able to monitor that and ensure that those permits are in place before we start work activities. So how do we link all that in a kind of a very decentralized environment? So we'll talk a little bit about just kind of how the Power Platform helps with that. And then, things like modern technology is how do we leverage things like remote assist or mixed reality or augmented reality to help really empower our field personnel on kind of near real-time learnings as things are happening, as well as streamline our service delivery or asset maintenance by putting less cost individuals in the field supported by engineers back in a remote location. And then kind of as we move down, what is the core of all this and really digital today? It's all about data. And so it's not just getting the right data and being able to quickly analyze that data, but it's also about being able to take action on that data. And so when you look at kind of a legacy environment, it's very difficult to do that. And many times I'm going into multiple systems and actually make that happen. And then it's about automation. So, what are the things that on the action side are the processes that we could potentially automate that individuals are doing today? And when we look at a solution like the Power Platform, which has kind of 4 kind of critical elements based on what we talked about here, one being on data, which is Power BI, the other being on Power Apps and how we create online, offline app experiences to be able to deliver either business unit level and or a specific work activity like an inspection level. Also giving the flexibility so that if you take inspections, for example, in some cases, we've got an endless demand for different inspection types based on new products and new requirements. So, having the ability for field personnel to kind of create their own forms to be able to capture those unique inspection related elements has been very difficult in the past. And, Power Apps or solutions like that make it very easy. And then we look at kind of Power Automate, which is this kind of, this what you hear about RPA or robotic process automation, which is just awesome stuff because it allows you to really create value in an organization immediately. And you can start with very small type of particular, manual processes that you want to automate to streamlining integrations. I mean, think of a workflow that starts in one business application and may cross 5 other business applications or operating systems, and that's a single workflow. Well, traditionally, each one of those systems has their own workflow. But with Power Automate, you really can create a single enterprise workflow engine that really can manage work activities and even take automated action across that ecosystem of multi-threaded technologies. And in some cases, even all the way down to the asset level, if you're looking at smart assets and taking kind of control command events around solving problems.
Right. So you introduced several of the Power Platform products. I think this next slide kind of summarizes a little bit what you're talking about.
So let me just talk to you kind of what I think our Sonata's perspective is a bit unique in the sense that we look at platforms as really all these different technologies as platforms. And what's changed in the cloud world is really, it's not the old days where you bought a business application, you hired a firm, and then you stood up that application. In the cloud world, there's so many different dimensions as it relates to really properly taking advantage of digital technology. So you've got data elements, you've got security elements, you've got architecture elements, and you've got process elements, and you've got all these different things that you've got to deal with today. So for us, when we look at, and we'll talk a little bit about platformation, it's just kind of how we do what we do, because what we found in the modern, in particular the digital world, is that if you don't take the right steps and you don't approach things as truly from a platform perspective, many times you can have failed projects, or there's very little value to the business because of the fact that it's kind of compartmentalized. And so when you look at Power Platform here, you can absolutely consume it in its kind of 4 primary, workloads, which is Power BI, which is data and analytics, which you could have a single reporting application across all your business applications, regardless of what those databases or data entities are. Power Apps these are Canvas apps or what I call model apps. So the ability to allow really end users to kind of build their own, kind of self-serve apps. But again, we recommend governance, and I'll talk a little bit about that versus still giving that autonomy for people to own some of their own automation, but at the same time, making sure you have the right governance in place so that it ultimately is done properly and you get the biggest benefit from that. Power Automate, I talked about, this is really about, that enterprise process automation, but it's also about leveraging technologies like bot technology so that you can replace kind of low-level, low-value tasks that maybe an individual is doing, like keying into a certain data from one system into other, or even interacting with individuals on that customer side of things, and you're using bot technology as it relates to interacting and that virtual agent side of things. So is
that the same as like RPA, robotic process automation, that kind of thing?
Correct. And even things like looking at OCRing, scanned invoices, let's say, into a system and automate that into an AP process so that you can streamline the vendor invoice kind of payment cycle.
Okay, so these are Microsoft products. So does Power? Sorry to ask, but does Power Automate? That's just for Microsoft products, right?
Correct. This is Microsoft Power Platform.
Can it automate things into other systems, other software?
Absolutely, and it is kind of more that model-driven approach. So when you look at kind of under the covers and how that's done, and how we used to kind of hard code things, when you kind of go to the bottom right here or the bottom left, and the 2 key components, which is data connectors and common data service. So data connectors, so I think there's over 200 different data connectors out there today. So whether it be competing products like SAP and having connectors into the Power Platform that exists today, or some of the kind of main systems that are out there from a control and from a smart asset kind of connect perspective. So what does that mean to you as a person that would roll out Power Apps? Is that cost of building an integration is hugely mitigated because the fact that connectors are already pre-built, to allow that to happen. When you look at the common data service, to me, this is the most exciting piece of really Microsoft's Power Platform. This is the holy grail. I mean, this is what we talk about. I think the industry went through this cycle of, we're all going to go to one system, and you've got these massive ERP systems and the consolidation of the MRP and kind of into ERP, and you got one system that does it all, to realizing that the world doesn't work that way. And also the fact that as the industry has matured and as this whole digital wave has come through, is that how we deliver what we deliver, how we manage and operate even our own assets, it's a multi-thread ecosystem. So either we are dealing with different systems because of the fact that our control systems are different than our particular asset systems, that are different than purchasing systems, and so on. And so you're always going to have this kind of dynamic requirement. And so what the common data service allows us to do is create that common thread, common language between these systems, which is really as I say, the holy grail to really kind of getting through system integration or through digital platforms. If you don't have that piece, it becomes very difficult to actually create value for all your stakeholders, whether that be customers, employees, or your partners. And what it does from a data perspective is it relates to allowing us to kind of use data across those different applications, find insights across that, and then ultimately take action on that. It's unbelievable. And then obviously the AI builder. So I think what Microsoft's done a great job is that AI, on its own it's a bit of a heavy lift as it relates to knowing how to properly build different models and really mature your models as it relates to using data and intelligent data. AI Builder, I think that Microsoft has done a good job at pre-building kind of foundational elements, so kind of what I'll call quick start elements, so that you can start leveraging data insights very early and automatically plug in your data models that exist today and start having immediate learnings and then creating immediate action off those learnings. So when you look at the impact of a platform like this, going back to what I said before, whether you decide to start with a small little POC or our Power Apps and timesheets, or you really take what we're talking about as this platform approach, which is really saying, okay, we see this as our path to transformation. And it gives us time to really look at our legacy systems and understand and build strategies around how we're going to replace those. At the same time, we can start immediately getting insights through intelligence. We can immediately start modernizing our user experience through Power Apps or Canvas apps. We can immediately start taking manual processing and automating those. So we're just driving costs down, we're driving efficiency up. And then we can start using bots and things like virtual agents to really look at getting our people more focused on high value tasks. So it's a very compelling platform, make that transformation happen. We're seeing customers do it, and we'll talk a little bit about the different ways customers are doing it with the Power Platform.
Great. Yeah, I think we have a couple of case studies coming up. But what you're outlining here, Matt, it's pretty amazing, right? I guess the low code side of this says, if I need to patch a hole in the dam, I can do something fairly quickly. But what you're outlining here is this is an enterprise platform.
Correct. And I think the cool thing is that whether a CEO comes to us and says, hey, Matt and Sonata, I need help on a kind of all up transformation strategy. In particular, we're looking at, implementing a tool like Power Platform, all that you see here. Can you help us with that? And then you have other cases where it's IT is wanting to modernize and they're struggling to really position with leadership and prove value of why these technologies are important to the business. So, it allows them to really take let's take the AP processing example. Everybody's got that pain. And we can take that as a simple use case, spin that up in a couple of weeks and be able to bring that back to the leadership and say, hey, here it is. It's tangible. Here's the results we're getting. And it's a very easy, consumable, high value use case that then validates going down this path. So we just couldn't do that before, which is what's so awesome about this technology.
That's phenomenal. Well, let's get to a couple of those examples you shared. Here's one.
So Maersk is a very large global company and a customer of ours, and not too different than what we were talking about before. They have a lot of obviously control and operating systems, and they've got a lot of people that are obviously out in the field, and so they were looking at a way that at anybody that's kind of touching that logistics cycle, if they saw something that was not working right or damaged or something like that, like what would be the quickest way that we could get that back to the right people so that we could plan that maintenance, or when that ship comes back on the port, we know exactly which container needs to be addressed and so on. So started out there with the Power App, created a very easy way for really anybody in their ecosystem to quickly be able to raise service requests and then downstream that into people taking the right action. We've evolved that into really what we call kind of an all-up Power Platform strategy with them, and we've got what we call an app factory model. So it allows them to really have the business to be able to continue to kind of come to them with business use cases or business cases rather, and then we can quickly turn those into use cases, do quick validation, and either it becomes an app or the business value is not high enough, and then they move on to the next one. So it creates this really agile process that allows them to transform how they modernize through the Power Platform.
That's phenomenal. You remember the old days, right? When spinning up an app or whatnot, was really a big project. And so somebody would come in with an idea, maybe they got the eye roll, maybe it got stuck in a back room, but it didn't happen. And so the way you all are doing this, people can jump on those ideas. They can be more innovative.
Well, that's it. You've got to have a quick way to basically take an idea, validate the business case, validate the functional capability. Is what we're thinking it going to work that well, and is it going to have the impact to our people, and be able to do that in a very finite point in time, because otherwise then it loses the value of making that decision and being able to kind of validate in a much more iterative type of process.
Right. We'll talk about moving faster. I think here's another study you were going to share.
So again, I think this is a good example where you look at things within the business that are not huge heavy lift items, and it's kind of surprised, like, why is this not being done by our core control systems? But at the same time, maybe it's the amount of steps we have to take, the processes we have to go through to do simple things like purchase good receipts, and so when you take some of these kind of larger work processes that we all deal with, and some of these large systems that we deal with, there's simple things like this where Power Apps and the Power Platform can really help us greatly improve our accuracy and drive down cost and drive up accountability on expenditures on operating assets and empowering our resources in the field.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's not stop there. I think you have some more examples for us.
So these are just kind of different, I think, ways to kind of look at how you can approach, the Power Platform and some interesting use cases. So on the left here, timesheets, here's a customer that has 3 different time and attendance systems because of 3 different lines of business, and they work very distinctively. But at the end of the day, the workers don't care. You've got people in the field that are working on multiple jobs, working multiple lines of business, and the most difficult thing is to get people to put time in on time. So how do you streamline that process? How do you make it very specific to the user? And how do you make as little steps as possible? And so that's really what we were creating here. So we weren't replacing their time and attendance systems that were critical to their business, but we were modernizing and creating efficiency around how that time was captured and capturing that time almost near real time as it was happening. So it drastically improved their day sales outstanding ability to collect cash. It improved the accuracy as it relates to the time entry to actually what was billable versus non-billable. And it had all these downstream effects. And so what's cool about a project like that is you can start with a very simple use case. And then when you look at it from kind of the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish, and you look at the Power Platform, it really allows you to start looking at things like Power Automate to see how, okay, now we've got this time entry. We streamline the capture side, and now we need to streamline the integration side into these other systems. So there's just so many different ways you can deal with that. That's awesome.
You said you mentioned Holy Grail earlier, right?
Yeah.
Faster cash, that's the Holy Grail.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to the right side here. All of our, whether it's oil and gas, utility, or manufacturing, we all deal with inspections, and so in most companies still today, it's very form-driven, automated. And what we found is the fact that a lot of stuff that we're doing is more about when things happen that we can go back and look at exactly what was the point in time that we had a conditional change, or how we kind of change how we're doing maintenance on those assets and so on. But what we're really finding with by automating more of the inspection process and being able to leverage that data, that we're improving the ability of how these companies are managing their assets and getting better asset life cycle, more predictability as it relates to catastrophic events, and really flexibility as it relates to dealing with new inspections that may come up as environments change and as new requirements change.
Phenomenal, Matt. Phenomenal. So I think you mentioned platformation earlier. So where does platformation really fit into the mix here?
I mean, the way I like to boil it down is that we try to take could be a complicated process and make it non-complicated, which is transformation. So if you look at really what's happening with the digital market and what we call born digital businesses like Amazon or like a Uber, for instance, these platform-based digitally born companies are totally disruptive to industries because platforms are the center of their business, and they control the ecosystem that everybody in their value chain and all the stakeholders in their upstream and downstream customers and partners really are reliant on their system to be successful. And so how do we take that same philosophy into traditional businesses and help them find that same opportunity in their markets, making more stickiness with their relationships and allowing competitive advantage with this kind of platform-based business model in their industry. So, I mean, you think of industries like utilities, very legacy kind of linear type businesses, and sometimes it's hard to think like, what is that platform-based business model? We'll talk a little bit about it here in a second, but many times it's not thinking about the fact that you don't need to be a retailer or a consumer base, but it's really about creating value to your ecosystem or i.e. your stakeholders. And when you make decisions as it relates to how we invest in technology and how we really leverage digital, it keeps that outcome or the outside in kind of thinking. So how do I make my partners better and more successful? And together we're going to do better together. And they're going to want to actually do more business with us. And we're going to have better quality delivery of services or maintenance of our assets. If you look at the customer side, it's that if I can make it easier for my customer to do business with me, not just my service quality, which so much of us, particularly with engineering-based companies, we're hyper-focused on delivering best-in-class solutions. But at the end of the day, we kind of forget about the operation and what the customer experience is like. So this is kind of what it's about. And when you look at whether it's model-driven platforms like the Power Platform and the easeability to create automation, or you're looking at highly custom systems. What we're finding is the fact that the digital wave is kind of outpacing strategy in a lot of companies. So what's happening is that you have departments that are building their own apps that is ahead of where the company is, let's say, on their digital strategy and even on their mobile platform strategy. So they'll end up with we have customers that have 1,200 different apps on different, like whether iOS, Android, and they're all native, and it's a mess, And
Right.
so that stat on the left is very true. And so it's not about that this is a crazy difficult process, but if you don't have a key couple pillars in place, it can become a very difficult process. And so where does that line kind of cross where you don't want to inhibit innovation, but at the same time, you want innovation done in a very strategic way, in a very predictable way, with the right governance so that we can ultimately drive those outcomes that strategy want to get to, allow for that innovation at the individual business and department level, and ensure that we are not getting into a situation where we've got all these different technologies, which is where so many of us are today, and can't innovate anymore because the fact that our systems
Right.
are holding us back from that.
Well, so Matt, platformation helps us get a little bit of discipline structure, and it looks like strategic alignment around that process. So you want to talk to us a little bit about the building blocks for platformation?
For us, it starts with what we call the digital agenda or digital mandate. So first and foremost, kind of maturity wise, as an organization, does that company have a digital mandate or digital, how is digital going to be used, whether they're doing it today, what do they see a place for it? You've got to understand that first and foremost. In some cases, we're helping customers with that. And because that really drives that shared vision on the outcomes that we expect from these programs and how we ultimately realize the benefit of that.
Okay.
So for us, we use design thinking principles, which is this kind of outcome-based type of way of doing things. If you think traditionally, we do things this way, those are your business requirements, and then, I want to know how well your system kind of maps to that. It's kind of a different way of thinking. It's really looking and working with companies to say, okay, what is it that either those problem statements you're trying to solve or things that you're trying to, or new opportunities that we've identified, how do we look at applying digital to that? And then what are the steps that we need to take to ensure that we get those outcomes that we expect? And that's what drives our requirements instead of kind of this traditional way. Because then it becomes much easier when you look at kind of blueprinting, architecting, these platforms and truly the platform is, again, you got to think about all those stakeholders. If I don't understand like how my partners are going to interact with me or the pain that they're having with us, if I don't understand my different customers and the different products and services and so on, then it's very hard for me to really understand what technology we should be using and how we can help build these platforms and apply digital to help all those stakeholders. And so it's just a different way of thinking, but we found it to be highly effective. And it helps companies get to value faster. It helps create value in that kind of platform-based business model value, which is that stickiness, that value to all my ecosystems. It makes it easier for me to work with you and so on. And then the last kind of point is, how do we get there? So every customer is a little different depending on, time, the value, depending on, do they have a vision and they want us to build that from scratch, or is it something where they feel that their processes are, outdated and they really want something that's kind of ready to go for their industry. So that's what we call Sonata Ready. These are industry built. In the case of Power Platform, these are industry specific use cases that we've kind of defined, for these different utilities or oil and gas or construction or ProServe. And then the Sonata accelerators, these are more horizontal platforms, like Power Platform is an example of that, where we're taking these best-in-class solutions and then building applications off of those, and then custom is obviously building from the ground up. And so I think I said this earlier, but this is how we look at everything. So again, if it's a small data project or it's a small app project, that doesn't mean that I forget about kind of the core underpinnings of platforms. And in this digital world, if you don't do this right, then you're having to go back and do reworks. You're having to buy these kind of ancillary mediary systems to either improve my APIs or get at the data, whatever it may be. So these are the four kind of pillars that we look at, which is the systems have to be open. So they have to be able to open architectures. And you're seeing that a lot with many applications these days, but it's critical. it has to be scalable. So it allows us to not only scale on the business that we know today, but if we have opportunities in the market, go back to the Amazon example. If tomorrow Amazon wants to be in the, to compete against Staples, they could dominate Staples probably in the next 30 days because of the fact that their platform, all they're doing is changing products, but they have the right platform to go to market immediately. They have the supply chain. So, the only way you can do that is having scalable kind of models and applications. Connected, obviously, the whole world is connected, particularly when you look at asset-intensive businesses. Although we were slow to kind of digital transformation, we are now kind of leading that initiative and really looking at connecting our assets. Kind of level one is really just, what are the learnings that we have and how do we improve kind of based on the behavioral of what's happening with that asset? How do we create predictability around how we maintain and ultimately get to a never fail type of situation? And then, how do we ultimately kind of interact with those assets from as I said before, kind of a control and command so that I can lower my operating cost model and maintain higher levels of, asset uptime, which obviously drives better production and better yield. And then intelligence, as I said, data is obviously the core of everything. And digital is really made data have a whole different value element to really look at how you can monetize and what the true role of data is in your organization. And when you add kind of intelligence with that, it over time is self-learning, self-improving, and so naturally as an organization you're making better decisions, taking better action, and empowering bettering decisions.
That's phenomenal. Matt, you mentioned at the very beginning of this slide when you were talking about the digital agenda that companies they're starting at different points kind of in this continuum. So I think your next slide talks a little bit about how you determine where they are in the process.
So we're big fans on maturity, and maturity can mean a lot of different things. But if you don't understand culturally where your organization's at, if you don't understand the maturity of your platform, if you don't understand the maturity of a particular business unit, for instance, that you may be trying to solve something for, it's very difficult. Just because you can buy the latest and greatest technology, it's not going to solve that issue. It's not the silver bullet. So we look at everything from a maturity perspective, and what we found through our doing digital projects is that there's kind of 4 quadrants where we see companies at, and obviously some companies are going to be kind of somewhere in between, but the bottom left is really kind of the early stage where leadership is not quite sure, how digital is going to be a game changer for them, where that kind of platform-based business model may be in their industry. And a lot of the innovation or a lot of the, dabbling with digital is coming from, or platforms like Power Platform is coming from IT. And it's a small little pocket where we created this app or we created this kind of data project. And then you have those kind of that leadership sees the opportunity of really how digital platforms can change their business. And they're looking for help on really building that strategy out, building that blueprint out, and realizing that through a plan and a roadmap and what projects they should be doing and how they should prioritize and so on. So we call that top down. So full commitment as it relates to leadership, driving through culture and driving the desire to really want to look at digitizing their entire business, but they need help as it relates to that strategy and plan. The mature is really, they have that plan, they have that strategy, they have their themes, which we'll talk about here in a second, but they're looking for platform partners, or they're looking for digital platforms to, let's say, around work management or around enterprise asset management and so on. And then leaders are really where you see a clear defined strategy. They've got key roles within the organization as chief digital officers and so on. And there's a top-down drive of innovation across the culture. There is strong governance across how they roll out IT projects like Power Platform, and there is the very clear initiatives that they need partners, specialty partners, to execute on. And so, depending on where they're at in that life cycle, we can go into a very innovative organization that's bleeding edge, and we can bring very cutting edge expertise and engineering to help them execute last mile projects. Or we can be working with leadership that says, hey, I need help from having a strategy altogether and working with my team to help build a plan of how we can get there, and what are the kind of near term, midterm, long term opportunities that we can start leveraging tools like Power Platform or digital-based tools like that to start transforming.
That's great. So the technology is core here, but it's not where you spend all your time. It sounds like a lot of your time is really spent helping the business get where they need to be so that they can ingest or digest the technology.
So yes and no. The process itself is meant to really streamline very quickly to help us and the customer understand what the need is and where they're at in that journey, so that we can quickly identify what are some immediate value elements that could be created. Power Platform is a great example. That's so within the Power Platform, based on where you're at in the journey, based on kind of these key problem statements you're trying to solve, is there some low-hanging fruit that we can immediately tackle while we're looking at architecting kind of the overall blueprint. So it's the purpose of it is really to get to value faster, to identify opportunities sooner, and understand the right approach and design to apply digital to help get there. So it's not meant to be this overly complicated process. It's really just about a methodical way of understanding about where that person is in that process, what are the needs they have, and quickly getting to resolution and value.
Okay, so not overly complex. Would 7 steps have something to do with that?
So absolutely, and this is really just kind of unpacking that what we just saw, which is, if someone's starting at the very beginning, then we're starting with kind of the maturity at its core, both platform and culture, and then we're kind of driving to ultimately the projects that we need to execute. If you're coming to me with the fact that you've got a clear strategy and you're looking for an expert around, let's say digitizing again work management or supply chain, then that's really looking at okay, what are the platform characteristics, and then what does that kind of roadmap and execution plan need to look like? So again, it's flexible in the sense of where a customer is engaging with us, and it is meant to really streamline the process to helping them transform is most predictable from a risk mitigation perspective, as quickly time to value to start seeing some real impact of leveraging transformation tools like platformation or Power Platform, and then making sure that they're on the right path and they can in essence realize those outcomes that they're really focused in on.
You promised us an example in the utility space, so I think that's what comes up next here.
Yeah, so this is just an example, like kind of unpacking for a particular utility customer. So, again, looking at the left here, they were top down. So this is really to say, Sonata, what is the kind of platform-based business model opportunity for us? And so when you look at utilities, it's a very kind of pipe driven or linear rather driven business model. And what's happened in the energy market is you've had tremendous change in how people are consuming energy, the role of utilities, even customers, bringing energy to the grid, and then things like microgrids, and you have all these different things, renewable energy and so on, that are impacting and disrupting our business model. So it's really looking at more of a nonlinear model, and going back to the opportunity here is how do we build a platform that allows us to be dynamic enough to take advantage of these different changes in the market, allow us to create the best customer experience possible, allow us to maintain the most predictable grid as it relates to resilience of our infrastructure and beyond. And then kind of the middle of those themes that I talked about, which some of these I just mentioned, but really about now that we understand what that platform-based business opportunity is, what are the key themes as it relates to areas that we want to focus in on or around applying digital to realize some of these key elements to the outcomes that we want to get. And then the far right is really kind of that design blueprint of the technology and what are the key elements that we need to get there.
Wow. So starting back from the left, business design.
Correct. So companies come to us kind of in, I'll say it, 3 main flavors. The left is really about, it's that top down, it's that we need help with the strategy. So this is, very much using design thinking principles. These are ideation workshops with, the C-suite operations and, key stakeholders, and really looking at defining really those outcomes that and those key disruption, those key value opportunities and so on. that become the cornerstones of the plan that then drive our digital kind of agenda, which we talked about before.
Okay. So then priorities and processes.
Again, customer has a digital agenda at this point in time. It's really about how do we best execute, what is the solution, the designs and strategies that we need to take, and what processes should we look at digitizing. But they've got a clear roadmap, and we're there as that platform partner to help them execute on that vision.
Okay. Okay.
And then the last is really around, digital services. So this is where someone is coming to us with a very specific need. They want to build a employee onboarding platform on Power Platform, or they want to build a data model around, predictive maintenance. So very definitive digital kind of workload that they're looking at automating. They need help around that. They need to have the right partner. They need help around the design, architecture, and execution. The other key element here is really about kind of, where we're helping customers a lot, particularly when you look at Power Platform, and that is building what we call a center of excellence. So, how do we put the right model in place, right policies and principles and architecture, and then execution that allows us to really not only best use this tool across the organization, but continue to drive value in a very iterative approach that is kind of creating best-in-class innovation. And that's really what that, and actually a lot of our particularly larger enterprise customers in the asset-based industries are coming to us because of that. So they've made an investment in the Power Platform. There's some pockets of innovation going on, but they're struggling with really realizing the true value and helping build kind of a best-in-class center of excellence, and creating that kind of innovation model to really drive value, across a multi-year strategy.
Right. Matt, this is a great event. We learned a lot about the Power Platform, which seems as if it has no bounds, right? There's so many things it can do, but I think you coined the phrase of 2020 when you talked about, kind of the digital technology outrunning strategy. Nobody does that on purpose, but these are some very powerful tools that can be put in the hands of people top to bottom of the organization.
That's right. And, and one last thing I would just finish on that, to get started, it doesn't have to be this massive, large engagement. That's what's so cool about this world. And many times customers come to us with a particular use case, and we do a quick POC to do that initial value validation, and then look at a much larger project. I think the key that I would close on is just that whether you're doing it internally yourself or you're looking at a partner like us to really help kind of build that center of excellence model, don't treat these, awesome technologies like Power Platform as just kind of standalone one-offs. You should still take the same discipline as any other, whether it's ERP or EIM or CIS or whatever system, your large enterprise systems. You should take that same discipline. And even on the development side of thing, although these model apps are very easy to create, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using the right governance or best-in-class way of doing development. And so that would be my kind of closing, recommendation to everybody.
Great, awesome. So Matt, as every good webinar should end, with a thank you and an invitation to reach out for more information. If you all see on the screen, you can email Matt directly, you can call him directly, or you can visit us on the web at www.sonatasopers.com. Matt has done several of these events where he talks about different technologies from ERP and CRM to field service and project-driven technologies. So reach out to us on the website, or again, reach out to Matt directly. So thank you everybody for attending, and Matt, thank you.
And thank you everybody for being here, and hopefully this was educational for you.
Awesome. Bye-bye.